All right, we're going.
What's up? Today we're just going to be talking about continuity and changes in the modern period for podcast. Our
Yeah,
podcast
some good
our
AP World
podcast
History
is going
podcast.
to be talking about how the modern period did definitely represent a significant amount of change in world history. And in order to prove that, we are going to have 8 different events through the entire time period of 1750 to 2000. Those events are going to be the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the American and French Revolution, World War I and World War II, decolonization, and finally the Cold War, right before our conclusion.
All
So,
right.
to start off with the first event, it's going to be the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment definitely had both lots of continuities and changes, but the changes here would definitely be more significant. So, I'm going to start with the continuities. So some of the continuities would be religion, more specifically Christianity, uh, governmental systems, um, the lack of feminist movements, and slavery. So for Christianity and religion, the Enlightenment made way for many discoveries that would like kind of contradict with the Bible. However, many scientists found their discoveries to still be able to hold true if they interpreted the Bible in a slightly different way, and religion still remained with the majority of the population. Governmental systems, like the monarchy, they didn't shift too much. Even though people thought that all human beings were created equal, lots of the governments still remained in a monarchical system before like the revolutionary periods. Not many feminist movements were started from the Enlightenment. Even though the Enlightenment had the idea of human rights, it more so focused on the idea that all men are created equally, particularly wealthy European landlords, and this would disclude women. Slavery is another continuity. Despite many Enlightenment philosophers recognizing that there's no intrinsic difference between them and their slaves, the practice of slavery still continued under the justification that the slaves were regarded as private property, not as people, which is uh, okay under Enlightenment policy. Now on to the changes, which definitely held more weight. The Enlightenment ideals allowed for constitutional recognition of equality between all men. Enlightenment, Enlightenment ideals also allowed for the development of laissez-faire capitalism, developments in science, and also happened to be the root cause of many Atlantic revolutions. So the equality between all men, Enlightenment philosophy just basically said that all men are created equal, and this had lots of influence on nations' constitutional policies. With the U.S., with France, with like the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Women in France, uh, especially during their revolutionary periods. And these Enlightenment ideals often made up core principles for the state's laws and policies. Enlightenment ideals also allowed for laissez-faire capitalism. The core Enlightenment belief was that the people ran the government, and this idea contradicted highly with the government controlled economic systems that went on at the time, causing the development of the laissez faire capital system, which was essentially no government control at all within the economy. Developments in many forms of science, such as astronomy, anatomy, biology, etc. Um, Lots of science within anatomy and astrology had gone largely unstudied, and the main idea at the time was that the sun was the center. I mean, the Earth was the center of the universe, as opposed to the sun, and the founding that that the sun was actually the center of the universe shocked a lot of people, and a lot of people actually didn't believe it at first. Um, the
Yeah.
Enlightenment also was the root cause of many Atlantic revolutions. So many nations saw the Enlightenment, and believed that it was contradicted with the way they ran at the time, which caused lots of Atlantic revolutions. So actually, let's look at some of those Atlantic revolutions with
Yeah.
Avi
I
right
was
now.
gonna I was gonna go into that a while back. Yeah, the Enlightenment and the both American, French, and we don't have this listed, but also the Haitian revolutions are like three very notable revolutions. Um, the American Revolution and the French Revolution were heavily inspired by by Enlightenment ideals. In the American Revolution, unfortunately, something that changed or something that continued even after this idea of all men being equal, which was not true because chattel slavery continued well into the 1800s, into the late 1800s. And same thing, kind of like Jake was talking about, how the Enlightenment, like, it said, oh yeah, everybody's equal, we're all cool and happy and fun, but then it like excluded, everybody who is not a white landowner or man, because that's another thing that continued is women did not get rights, especially like suffrage until the 1900s. I'm pretty sure. But long time after the American Revolution, which is started in 1776. Also, again, same type of thing. The Enlightenment was supposed to be like, oh yeah, let's all be fun together and cool, but the social classes stayed the same. So the rich stayed powerful and stayed like being the people that ran everything from behind the scenes. Pretty much, they had the most say. And racism, heavily heavily influenced by social Darwinism, which Jacob talked about a little bit, about this idea of like, yes, you did, of that like certain people and like races and groups of humans around the world were literally like physically less evolved than white people, which is obviously not true. But that racism it still freaking continues today, unfortunately. And a lot of things also changed. Things like the American Revolution, like I sort of talked about for a second. I didn't even talk about it. I just mentioned the Haitian Revolution took a lot of inspiration from the American Revolution. And one of the main things is the American Revolution started democracy. So they were no longer under the control of Britain. They were their own country, and they made a democracy with a constitution, and everything was like that. So officials were voted in, by the people, and yeah. And another thing that changed a little bit. Well, I actually never mind. I was gonna say it's not as significant, but I actually think it is arguably very very, what's it called? Consistent. No, wait, what? No, that doesn't make sense. It's very important, I guess. It's expansion of territory. They expanded west. They went over the Appalachians, the Louisiana Purchase, $15 million. They bought Mississippi River, one of the best waterways that led to American wealth and expansion, and they kept going west, and they, fought in the Mexican-American War. They bought, or no, they didn't buy. They got Florida, and then California. They just huge expansion, because previously under the rule of Britain had put like a line of like how far you could go westward. They didn't want the settlements to expand. So after the American Revolution, they expanded. And I know I'm talking a whole crazy lot right now, but the French Revolution was very, very similar, because they were based on the same ideals of Enlightenment.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the French Revolution as well.
Yeah. I will tell you.
Try to
So
be more interactive during your talk.
yeah. All right. Riley, if you want to butt in also as well. Something that was, Christianity also like stayed the dominant religion. It was before, yeah. There was, as much as, there was a bunch of scientists and everybody was saying like, a lot of the things that the church was saying was incorrect, especially in the sense that Earth was the center of everything. But people still were Christian. They still did their thing, and a lot of famous scientists were still Christian and still practiced Christianity. And similar to the American Revolution, the social classes stayed very this like very similar to as they were before the French Revolution. So rich people still a lot of power, still on top of the hierarchy. Um,
What about the monarchy? Did that relate to that at all?
yeah, yeah. So the monarchy continued. They just lost a bit of. They lost their like absolute rule. So they're still monarchy, still people, but they were not like this absolutist rule. They were not the word of God. They were just a ruler. And yeah, and something that notable that changed, and also that the American Revolution, did their thing with too, was the separation of church and state. So, people argue that that is still not true in America right now. Um,
Interesting.
but that is something that officially changed under what they've said they were going to change. And a lot of other things like basic rights for humans, every human is equal type of thing, which still is not practiced, but in theory that was how it was supposed to go.
Yeah.
Also based
Wait,
off the Enlightenment.
that sounds like the Enlightenment, right? Do you think the
Yeah,
Enlightenment caused like the French Revolution?
yeah, and the Haitian
Because
Revolution and the American Revolution and a lot of other revolutions. Those were the three notable ones.
that's a pretty big, significant change in world history.
Yeah, big, really big one.
Yes.
Thanks, Riley.
So, so
Oh,
Riley,
so wait, so
oh
wait, tell me a little bit about like the king, right? I mean, I'm
yeah,
pretty sure I know a little bit about the king. The king still had, I mean, the king no longer had rule over France, right? But the monarchy kept going. Tell me a little bit about the king.
um, yeah. So the monarchy continued. Napoleon came in. Oh, oops. Napoleon came in um, shortly after the French Revolution and put it all back together, pretty much a little bit. But a lot of the ideals still continued. But Napoleon kind of put together this still monarchy thing. Yeah. Um. So Riley, also, something we didn't really talk about, but in the Enlightenment also came nationalism. This idea that you were a
Oh
person
yes,
of your own country, and I'm an
True.
American. I'm a person in a country. Before this Enlightenment and these revolutions, people didn't think that way as much. So how can that apply into some major wars that
Like,
happened?
do you mean world wars, maybe?
Possibly.
how
Oh,
many of them?
there's two of them. Okay. Um. So for the next time period, 1900 to 2000 or present day, we analyzed World War One, and World War Two, and decolonization and the Cold War. And in World War One, there was both continuity and change. Um, I'd say this is a big change during the time of world history because there's a lot of new technology at the time, such as like machine guns, tanks, or barbed wire. World War One was also like the first World War or like total war, and this is where soldiers from colonies would fight in this war. And because it was a total war, it involved like soldiers as well as civilians, and they pretty much mobilized like the entire population of a nation, to just increase their chances of winning wars. And some other changes was the increased like use of fascism, which is like authoritarianism. And some examples of this are Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany. And these emerged like around World War One or after World War One. And then around the same time as well, there was a lot of collapse of empires such as the Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the German and Russian Empire. During World War One, a big change was Russia's switch to communism in 1917, and another change is how women started working in factories to produce ammunition or other supplies that were needed to use or needed by soldiers to be used in the war.
Whoa, sounds like the world had a complete 180.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was it was a really big change. Um, But despite all these changes, there were still continuities from before World War One. Some examples of these are there's alliance systems. There was already like alliance before the start of World War One, such as like Britain, France, and even Russia. They already kind
Was
of
it
like
the
had
Entente or
a little bit
something?
of alliance.
The Triple
But
Entente?
yeah,
Entente.
triple
Something like that. On
entente.
top. Yeah. Okay. Okay. French people. French class people.
I do
French
take
people.
French, so
Oh, okay. I'm out here learning
yeah, that
Spanish.
that is pretty important to me.
Yeah. Um, and then the the triple allies with Germany and Italy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Some more continuities are the increased industrialization for the economy, the increased militarization for the armies, as well as imperialism for just raw materials for their industrialization, and the nationalism. Because it was a world war, so a lot of these nations, with nationalism, the nations grew this hatred for other nations, but it also helped to unify the nation as like one strong country. Nationalism also led to a lot of rivalries, such as between Germany and France. And another continuity is how it was mainly men fighting on the front lines, and women mainly like work jobs at home. And it was rare that women would fight like on the front lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that wasn't the only World War. There was a second one.
You don't say.
Um, yeah, World War Two.
Very creative name.
So sounds like World War One didn't
It sounds
do
like
a complete 180, maybe like 175.
it's like the rise of fascism, and because of the Treaty of Versailles and how Germany and Mussolini or Hitler and Mussolini were pretty upset about the very harsh conditions Germany was especially put under, and Italy as well because Italy still kind of crumbled a little bit because of that fascism. That
That
sparked
fascism, man.
the World
Yeah.
War II.
Wait, but why was Germany in like such a bad state after World War One?
Because they lost, and France especially pushed very hard against Germany.
They put
Yeah,
serious
They
sanctions on.
Yeah,
yeah, with
huge
the Treaty of
fines.
Versailles. Yeah,
Their economy was completely collapsed. They had no military. They weren't allowed to build a military for the most part. Everything was really bad, and Hitler kind of took advantage of that chaos, and he also felt very strong about
Who would have guessed
rebuilding
World War
the great
Two
Germany
was linked to World War One?
in his eyes.
That's insane.
yep.
Yeah, it's almost like that carries on to World War II. Some historians say, like us fellow historians, it was a continuation of World War One.
Yeah.
Ugh,
Yeah.
that's deep.
So
So,
Riley, how did that happen?
what exactly happened in World War Two? What was that about?
Oh, I can answer that. In World War Two, just like you said, it was a continuation of World War One. And because of this continuation, there's still the increased militarization. There is still the presence of alliances with U.S., Britain, Russia, and France. And they're all kind of working against Germany as well as Japan now. Another continuity is how people from colonies took part in the war to fight for kind of like the parent colony. And another example of this is or Indians fighting for Britain, because they promised that India would be liberated if they contributed to the war. And more continuities would be the industrialization and the nationalism, both for the same reasons as World War One. And just like World War One, this was a total war involving civilians and the soldiers. Um, and also something that continued is anti-Semitism. So before World War Two, there was a lot of discrimination against Jews, and it was also seen during World War Two with the Holocaust and the mass murders of Jews in Europe.
Evil stuff.
Yep, and that was all caused by Hitler, who was a fascist leader.
Well,
A fascist leader of Germany. Yeah.
interesting.
Yep.
Wow.
So it sounds
And
like World War Two
oh,
had a lot of things like similarities and continuities to World War One.
Yep. But
Are there any
even
changes?
though there are a lot of changes,
Oh yeah.
um, there are some pretty significant changes. Um, so in World War II, there was actually a change in alliances. So most of the alliances were the same, and the fact that the war was fought in alliances is still a continuity. But in terms of who was on which side, Japan actually left the side of U.S., Britain, Russia from World War I, and in World War II, Japan actually joined sides with Germany for the Axis powers. Another change is the development of new nuclear technology, such as atomic bombs. This was used by the U.S. against Japan during World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then World War II also caused the creation of new nation states. An example of this would be the creation of Israel. And because of the horrible mistreatment of Jews during the Holocaust, the winners of World War II decided to create Israel for the Jews, and this is just an example of the many nation states that were created from this war. World War II also changed as millions of people died around the world, not only the Jews during the Holocaust, but also Soviets from the Soviet Union. And then following World War II, there was a major shift in like the global power and who had the most like power and like who was a global world leader. And instead of like Europe or Asia, it was U.S. and the Soviet Union who emerged as the world's strongest like global powers.
You
What
talked
about
a bit
the
about like the new technology that was for like atomic bombs, and then also in World War I with like machine guns and such. I think
Yeah,
a product from that would be the Industrial Revolution. The
yes,
it
revolution
would be
where industrializing happened and lots of new technology was made in factories and coal and steam engines and such.
it would
yeah.
definitely be. I think we've gone
Perhaps
way too far into this presentation without saying one word about the Industrial Revolution.
I
So
think
let's get
this
onto that.
presentation is also 22 minutes long.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
should just continue with some
Oh yeah.
We
continuities and
can we
changes
can
in
change
Industrial
it
Revolution.
eventually.
Yeah. Let's
Oh,
try
we
to
skipped it. Oop.
wrap this up quick. No, we didn't skip it. It's just
Yeah, we
okay.
just bounce around.
Uh, so continuities and changes of the Industrial Revolution. Obviously, it had both. Obviously, I think more changes than continuities, but we're gonna get into the continuities. Um, so one of the continuities would be the continuation of old technological methods. The one I'm talking about in particular would be the spinning jenny. The spinning jenny was basically this wheel that would spin, and you could use it to sew clothes. It was like insane at the time. And a lot of people argue that this was what initially sparked the Industrial Revolution because the Industrial Revolution basically happened when people were able to make the steam engine, which used coal to put pressure and to activate the spinning jenny in order to create like a spinning wheel to create a steam engine. So a lot of people argue that it was originally this spinning jenny that sparked the Industrial Revolution. So a continuity of that would be the spinning jenny. Obviously, another continuity would be the social classes. Largely, the top and bottom classes remained similar in like the idea of traditional elites and lower peasants or slaves. There's a lot of shifting going on in the middle, but the traditional elites and peasants have remained pretty much the same. Traditional elites remained up because of agriculture. Agriculture had been increasing prior to the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution only helped it increase even more because of obviously the new technology that would help on farms. Thus, landowners of this agriculture only profited even more, and it like kind of just further pushed these elites. And the bottom classes, like the slaves, they pretty much went from working on farms for like pretty much very little pay to working in factories for also very little pay. Another one would be the another continuity, the production of raw materials. The raw materials continued because actually it increased during the Industrial Revolution because raw materials were needed even more in order to like be exported. They were more easily exported because of the Industrial Revolution, and they were also more needed because of the Industrial Revolution. It never stopped with um, like farms and other means of producing agricultural goods, they all continued to exist around the world and actually profited even more from the Industrial Revolution. Now let's get onto the changes. Um, Changes would be shifts in global power, decrease in agriculture with a simultaneous increase in factory labor, migrations, a lot of migration shifts, and an increase in carbon emissions. So some of the shifts in global power would be Western Europe, along with the US, began, like, kind of took the Industrial Revolution and used it to industrialize at a far faster rate than many Asian and Middle Eastern countries, which had previously held the global power, um, causing Western Europe and the US to gain this global power. Also, a decrease in agriculture worldwide, along with an increase in factory production and labor. So like I said, there was pretty much the factories boomed like an insane amount during the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of people going to work from farms to factories caused an increase in the production that these factories had, also with the steam engine and the labor that they had. The labor largely increased due to the migration to these urban areas, aka the factories. People who were working on farms saw these factories as an opportunity to get more money and like profit a little bit more because it was an opportunity to be in an urban city, even if you were working for pretty low pay. So people from farms would migrate to these urban areas in search of work in factories, and it developed the working class, which was a pretty low class. Carbon emissions also spiked during this because of like obviously the very high number of factories, and this
Hmm.
caused many different effects on the environment, such as deforestation, global warming, pollution, and a lot of those which we still see today. This was a change that happened during this period that we're still seeing the effects of.
Yeah.
So now that we've given some context for a lot of the industrial powers in both the world wars and stuff, let's also move on to how the Industrial Revolution influenced some other 1900 events, two in particular.
Yeah. Like you could say that industrialization, helped in the World War I and two and such, and making new technology. And in those wars, like Riley said, there was decolonization that happened.
Oh,
Wow.
decolonization.
I bet there are some changes and continuities that could be explained right there.
You don't say.
Oh,
Yeah,
um,
you
oh,
don't
wow.
say, Riley.
um, let's see. Let's start with the continuities. So the continuities of decolonization is there's still like these economic ties between the the colonies and the colonizer, and this is just so they can like maintain as much economic benefits as possible. Decolonization continuity is also the growing nationalism within the colonies. So nationalism was always present within the colonies, and even throughout this process, like nationalism was still present and also played a role in like uniting these colonies under as like one nation. Um, Another continuity is the use of arms or force to achieve their freedom. An example is like the American and French Revolution. They used arms to gain their independence, and this is still continuing as many colonies um, struggled for independence through armed force. Europe also tried to instill their democratic values into these colonies, and so even while they were withdrawing and while they still had full control of the colonies, they tried to like put as many of the European values, such as democracy, into their styles of government.
Wow.
And there's also like a lot of ethnic and ideological conflict within these colonies. And so this is just a big continuation throughout like the lifespan of all these colonies. Like there was racism in the U.S. There's Muslims and Hindus who had conflict in India,
Ooh,
and there's just a lot of ethnic and ideological conflict in like Africa and colonies in Asia as well.
interesting,
Um,
interesting.
and for the changes of decolonization, some big significant ones would be the decline of imperialism, obviously, as Europe no longer had control over these colonies, and they started to withdraw. There's also the formation of new states, newly formed colonies such as India, a lot of states in Africa, and some countries in East Asia such as the Philippines.
Wow.
Um, and another change would be that the participants of World War II became broke, and because of this, they could no longer maintain a presence in the colonies, and they were forced to give up this territory. And an example would be France and Britain losing their colonies in Algeria and India.
Wait, Riley, I have a question. How
Yeah.
how did these colonies go about gaining their independence?
Oh, that's a great question. So like I talked about, they used like force of arms to liberate themselves. So like in Algeria, they pretty much fought by force against France to free themselves. But there's also another way, through negotiation, and this is a more peaceful way of doing it. And a way you can see this is in India. So Muhammad Gandhi and other leaders, they led nonviolent protests, and they were able to negotiate their word freedom pretty much.
Interesting stuff.
Wow.
Interesting stuff.
Well,
So we've heard a lot about decolonization, but a lot of decolonization also had ties with another massive ideological conflict around a similar time period. Uh, it'd be great if we could get some insight on that particular ideological conflict
You
from
could
our
say
group member here.
the war was a little chilly and might need a jacket. It could need some blankets because it is the Cold War.
yep.
Look at that
Oh,
intro.
that is an amazing intro
Also,
to an
30
amazing
minutes in.
explanation of continuities and
No,
change.
Yeah.
clear from 1.5 speed. Okay.
So you want to go a little bit into this, Avi?
Let's keep going. Yeah. Okay, so a continuity that happened in the Cold War was militarization. So after World War II and before the Cold War, so I guess you could say the Cold War started after World War II. But even before World War II, because of the industrial revolution, that was also partly in capped of stuff. I don't know what word I just said, with the Enlightenment and with decolonization and with the both world wars and everything we've talked about today, all led up to new technology being made and new, big militaries, big money, big bombs, big nukes. And because of those big nukes, it made the two superpowers of the U.S. and the USSR unable to fight each other, because if they did fight each other face to face, or I should say they weren't able to fight each other face to face. They fought proxy wars, but we'll get to that in a second. They could not fight each other face to face because they were so powerful that if they did fight face to face and unleash everything on each other, we probably would not be here today, because that would be a lot of, zombie stuff, kind of like an apocalypse type movie. Alliances stayed the same for the most part. So a lot of Western states and the USSR and Eastern Europe, they were their own separate, alliances. There's also like what was known as like the Soviet bloc. So like states like China was like sort of good with the USSR because they were also communist, but they weren't like full on allies for the whole time. And actually, I think China helped. I think the U.S. in Vietnam, or maybe it was Afghanistan. I'm not sure. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know. I forgot which proxy war that was, where China actually helped the Western countries. But do you know, Jacob?
I don't. I was gonna
Oh,
say
okay.
the Korean War, but I realized that they did not help the Western countries in that.
Yeah. So yeah, and so a lot of countries were involved in these proxy wars. Obviously, nationalism was huge in a lot of in the country. So like places like in America, we know a lot about people lost jobs. People were scrutinized for being communist or being suspected of being a communist and betraying your nation and being a traitor. Like all these ideas of being a traitor to your nation is nationalism at its finest. Is the definition of nationalism. Um, and yeah, and so ultimately the Cold War was the clash of capitalism versus communism. In the subsection, you could say a dictatorship versus democracy, but on the surface, it was communism and capitalism. And changes, lots of things changed. I kind of talked about how the two countries could not fight each other. The U.S. and the USSR cannot fight each other face to face. So they fought in a lot of proxy wars, such as in Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iran, and more, where they helped each, like the communist side or the capitalist side, by arming them and fighting each other. So like in Vietnam, northern Vietnam was communist, so the USSR helped them out, and southern Vietnam was capitalist, and so the U.S. helped them out. And so that was kind of like a way for the U.S. and Russia and the USSR to fight each other without fighting each other face to face. And so that was a big change, because previously in the past, if countries have beef with each other, they just fight each other, straight up. And so this was different, because these two countries slash unions were not able to fight each other because they were so powerful, because of the militarization, because of the Industrial Revolution, which was caused by the Enlightenment. And that was all because of World War I and World War II and the American Revolution. Yes, Jacob, you have a question?
I do have a quick question. So, in both World War One and World War Two, we saw a lot of guns and ammunition being produced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, is this something that kept going, or is this something that changed in the Cold War?
Oh, it kept going. Lots of things were created. Lot more ammo. What? Yeah. We just militarization. It kept going. I mean, yeah. Oh, I already talked about it. Militarization.
Oh, did you? I'm sorry. I'm so
sorry. Yeah. More weapons. Better weapons. Advancements in technology. More ammunition. More everything. Everything was expanded. And we kind of.
Were there other ways of fighting, or like other
Yes.
new weapon technology?
Oh well, in terms of weapon technology, it was nukes, nuclear weapons. But I thought what you were going on was about like not even wars, but just like competition, like the space race, where Russia, the USSR, I keep saying Russia because that was the predominant force in the USSR, but the USSR sent a satellite to space before the U.S., then they sent a person into space before the U.S., and then the U.S. said, no more. I'm sending people to the moon. So they sent people to the moon. And they had some competition right there, the space race. Some more changes, things like, I already talked about a lot of these things, that the U.S. and the USSR tried to spread their ideologies to different countries and to back different sides of like rebellions or other conflicts going on in proxy countries. So yeah. So in conclusion,
let's conclude this.
Shall we?
Yeah.
So, what do you guys think are the characteristics of the modern period that make it different from the previous periods? Because it definitely is very, very different.
Very, very different. I would say conquest, imperialism. Never before have empires been so big as the British Empire, for example, the largest empire out there, rivaled only by the Mongols.
It's a tiny island.
I know, tiny little island. And you could connect that with the Industrial Revolution, because they got all big and rich, and they made their big military, and they defeated China in the Opium Wars, and they got super rich, and because of that industrialization, which is another thing that I say changed or was significant, and a significant characteristic in the modern period, industrialism. Do you guys have anything else?
Yeah, man, give me, the Enlightenment. That was definitely something that shaped the entirety of the modern period. I personally argue that it was the Enlightenment that sparked a lot of these things, because the Enlightenment led to the scientific revolution, which led to humans getting a lot of knowledge from the older Islamic world, and that led to things such as maybe the Industrial Revolution. The Enlightenment was basically the belief that human reasoning and knowledge is able to govern their lives and that all human beings have these natural human rights. This led to tons of revolutions that we've already gone over extensively, uh, establishing nation states, and lots of new ideologies. These ideologies practically shaped like the entire modern period. You got democracy, socialism, liberalism, communism, laissez-faire capitalism, capitalism with minor government intervention, but still some government intervention, and then an economy like communism where it had full government intervention. So we see how the Enlightenment leads to these new ideologies, and these new ideologies in themselves are complex enough to be on a scale of not just this ideology and this ideology, but like a scale of like, oh, okay, no government intervention, that doesn't work, so let's go to minor government intervention. Oh, okay, this doesn't work, so let's go to full government intervention, and that leads to a lot of communist states, and it's just really interesting how just
Yeah.
somebody realizing that human reasoning and knowledge can govern their lives can lead to all of this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Um,
Anything else?
Anything else, Riley?
yeah, we talked about industrialization, right?
We could go over it again if you'd really like.
Um,
Uh, well, I don't know
I
if we
got
should
I got
talk
something down here.
nuclear
Avi's
weapons
got something.
or that. Yeah, what do you got, Avi?
Oh, okay. I was thinking about just like scrolling down in our mental libraries. You know, scrolling down in our mental library of knowledge from all our AP World History learning that we've done.
You know, we
Um,
sounds to me like
Sounds to me that someone doesn't understand what I'm saying. So I will go on
nationalism.
and say some nationalism, baby. Also
Oh,
a byproduct of enlightenment. Because really, like Jacob said, enlightenment was pretty much the fuse that started everything in the modern world, in my opinion, in our opinion, I think. But nationalism, that was a big thing. That was a big part of enlightenment. Caused a lot of wars. Caused a lot of things to happen. Lots of, like I said, bad things in like the USSR and the US, where like people got scrutinized for being possibly communist, possibly capitalist and stuff. So yeah,
Good thing none of us here are communists, right?
yeah.
I
All
believe
right.
in freedom of belief,
That's a good
freedom of
belief to have.
ideology.
All right.
It's a very good belief to have.
So I think in conclusion,
We
the
should talk
modern. Oh, never
before we
mind, never mind, never mind. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
before we get
Oh,
into that, I think we should talk a little bit about modernism, which is a lot more of a recent thing.
Is it okay if I start off with the modern topic?
yeah. Let's do it.
Go for it, man.
Go for it.
Sure. So, I would say that this is definitely like a more modern period than the rest of history, because of the whole globalization of the world. There's new ways of spreading technology around the world. There was like the internet, there's new telephones, like cable lines and all that. Really help like globalize technology and help spread it. There's new ways of managing like the global economy, through like through like the IMF and the World Bank, to like the global economy. Like if the economy of the world was just like globalized. It's a pretty like modern phenomenon. There's also a lot of worldwide movements for human rights concerning like race, class, gender, and religion, and there's also like advocating for the preservation of the environment. So like from the Industrial Revolution, there's a lot of like pollution and destruction of the environment, and it was only until like the modern period where they people started like advocating to preserve the environment and preserve our earth, with like climate change and all these activists. And there's also more globalization of the world through like culture. So culture and like all sorts of these arts, they pretty much spread all around the world rapidly, and like the whole consumer culture, it became more popular and widespread. And there's also new institutions around the world, that sought to maintain world peace, and an example of this is the United Nations. And so these all show kind of like the globalization of the world, and it really makes like this period like a more modern period than the rest of history.
I know we're really pushing on time here, but another quick example of modernism would, I think, be the scientific and architectural developments that blew everything from the previous generations out of the water. I think these would include vaccines for diseases, like a lot of the ones we see today. You know, some diseases are completely gone from our normal world, while some others continue, such as malaria. You know, you've got birth control, you've got antibiotics, X-rays. These were all like incredibly revolutionary, along with modern architecture, which was so much more defined and advanced than anything previous, due to advancements in education that also resulted in advancements within fields such as mathematics or complex sciences. And one of the ideas of modern architecture was to directly contrast with the more Victorian esque style of architecture from the previous generations. Another massive one would be the development of the internet. This one was much more recent, but the development of the internet and social media created unprecedented amounts of global connections, which connects to what Riley explained very well about globalization around the world, and the internet played a massive part in this.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've said
All right.
everything.
I think we
That
did.
was way too long, but we got
It's all right.
through all of it.
Yep.
Um,
So I think
so
in
sorry you had to sit
conclusion,
through all this.
yeah. Sorry, Dr. Tierney. We did not plan to have it be. Was
We
it
really didn't. We
YouTube
just
only
love
40,
goes,
talking about
45 minutes right now?
YouTube only goes up to 2x speed, so
Yeah, you might have
probably
to.
be a long presentation.
But
it.
anyway,
Two X
in
speed.
conclusion, we think that the changes in the modern world past 1750 were more significant than the continuities, because those changes changed everything drastically, especially with like the Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, stuff like that. Those all led into so many different things: the different world wars, different revolutions, different little chilly wars. Um, and so yeah, I think the continuities just were not as significant as the changes. Do you guys
Very
agree?
true. They definitely weren't, you know, there was crazy amounts of continuities. If you look at the world today, you'll definitely see similarities from the world back then. But, you know, pretty much everything we've been saying here just demonstrates how the changes practically blew the continuities out of the water.
Oh yeah.
I'd say like a 10 to 2 lead is massive.
All right. Riley, you got
Riley,
anything
got
else to
anything?
add?
Um, just because I see it on the paper, just to credit each of us, we all pretty much worked like collaboratively. We
Yeah.
all worked on like contributed each like historical development, adding continuities, adding changes, and we all like added events to the timeline. So
Yeah,
it's
it was
really like
pretty even.
collaborative effort. Um,
I did all
yeah.
the work.
Yeah,
Okay.
honestly, Dr.
Yeah.
Tierney was just me. They're just lying.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thank
Sorry
you.
for making you
Over
watch this,
coffee.
but give us an A, please, por favor.
Have a nice
We
day.
we
All
we love
right.
this class. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.